All right. Hey, everybody. Tane Nix here, back again. Welcome back to the Expat Files. Thanks for joining us. Today, I have my friend Joe Withrow, who I know from my time at the Agora. If you don't know what the company, the Agora, is a big online publisher, really the 800-pound gorilla in the space for people looking for individual, personalized kind of financial newsletters, investing newsletters, etc. But also the Agora encompasses all kinds of things. The very first company that the founder started, or the very first business affiliate that he started, is called International Living. They're still around. Wonderful resource for people trying to internationalize their lives. And that was founded, I think, in either 77 or 1979. So they've been around that long. But Joe and I worked at one of the Agora affiliates together several years ago. And now I get to check in with him and circle back to talk about something that he's doing that I think everybody should know about. You're going to want to know about this. This is an incredible effort that he's also putting together to help folks, again, right, take back more freedom from the very bad things that are happening, the very bad people who are leading some of our institutions. This is Joe's putting together just a masterclass in how you can really take back some portion of your freedom. And so we're going to get into that. Welcome, Joe. Thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's great to talk to you.
Oh, Tane, it's an honor, man. I'm thrilled to be here, and I love what you're doing. I think it's, I mean, the 2020 is like this is important. This is important. So I'm just
very nice
to chat with you today.
Yeah, it's so exciting that we get to circle back, especially under these circumstances, because of course you have your own thing going. Joe is an analyst and worked. Well, he'll talk about his time at Wall Street and sort of what brought him to the Agora. And looking at independent kind of research and sort of what the dichotomy was between sort of working at the institution, you worked at a big Wall Street bank that everybody's heard of. But then also, Joe, why don't you tell people actually your background and what brought you to where you are today, both in terms of the stint that you've done at the Agora, where we worked, and also, you know, what motivated you to launch your own project, and go ahead and intro that to people and tell them what it is.
Yeah, I'll be as concise as I can. So I started, my first career was in corporate banking. And I really kind of got my start, you know, climbing the ladder, right? That's what you do in banking. You try to climb the ladder. So I got my start. I really got my big break in the aftermath of the 2008 mortgage crisis. I was working in the loss mitigation department of a massive bank. And basically we were tasked with cleaning up the mortgage crisis, which, you know, I was a young, ambitious guy, so I didn't think too deeply into it at the time, but all we were doing was sweeping it under the rug, and we were ignoring second order effects completely. So that's a completely different conversation, but I used that experience to catapult into kind of a higher position within.
Well, let me interrupt you, actually. I think it's interesting for people to know this. So, like, you worked on one floor of, can we say the bank? We can, right? Like, they don't care.
It mattered to me. Yeah.
Yeah. You worked at one floor of sort of Wells Fargo, sort of like spin control, right? Damage control.
Yeah.
And essentially the job that you guys were brought in to do was to figure out how to get taxpayers to foot the bill, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, these bad mortgages exist, but the government will essentially pick up the tab, which means taxpayers will pick up the tab if they qualify according to these criteria. And then your job was to like try to make them, I mean, I'm stretching the truth here, right? But is that more or less how it worked? It was like, how do we actually get the government to pick up the tab for this?
Yeah, well, it was driven by the government. The governments came in and they said, hey, we can't have all these foreclosure statistics hitting the news.
That's it. Yeah.
So here's what we want you to do. And so there's numerous government departments that are involved with mortgage origination. You've got HUD, FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA, USDA. There's various loans. So I worked in the division where we dealt with HUD and FHA, Federal Housing Administration. But all these divisions created their own criteria for modifying past due loans. And they came to the banks and they said, hey, we want these mortgages to go away. We don't want to see mortgages on the news anymore. So here's what we've got. Go through your portfolio. Here's the qualifications. They were very minimal. We want you to modify as many past due loans as you can, get them out of the foreclosure process. We will pay you a flat fee for every loan you modify. So right off the bat, the incentive for the bank, and this was the call we got, the meeting we had in the morning, it was like, hey guys, you need to go through the loan portfolio. Each of you have a certain chunk of it, go through every loan in your portfolio and figure out how to modify as many of them as possible according to these criteria. And so then it was just, it was the incentive was just to get it done no matter what. And so just real quick, just to emphasize the importance of second order effects, the way these modifications work was we simply took the past due balance, which included late payment fees, and it included all the attorney fees and costs that had accrued. Once you go into foreclosure, it goes to an attorney, they start billing, so we took all the past due payments and all the fees. We basically chucked, we recapitalized them. We stuck them back at the end of the loan, stretched the loan back out 30 years. Didn't matter if they had 6 years left on their payment. Didn't matter. Goes back out 30 years. We could drop the rate to whatever the FHA's floor rate was for that day. So a lot of times we could get the rate down. And so depending on where they were with the rate, depending on where they were with the term, in many cases, we could reduce their mortgage payment. So the borrowers loved it. They were about to lose their house. And now we're saying, hey, we're going to make you current and we're going to give you a lower mortgage payment. Here's what nobody was paying attention to. And I raised this question in the meeting and I was told to shut up, basically. But
I'll bet you
nobody
were.
was paying attention to what are the market values of these homes today. As you know, in the wake of 2008, the national, on average in the US, real estate prices came down 30%. In many markets, prices came down a lot more than that, right? We weren't looking at what's the market value of this home today. We weren't looking at what's the principal balance that we're going to stick these guys with after the modification. I guarantee you, in many cases, we were sticking people with mortgages that they were way underwater.
Yep.
Nobody cared. And so that was the question I raised, was like, hey, well, is anybody looking at this? Are we going to
excuse me, this whole thing is wrong. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody in 2 years has an emergency and they got to sell their house or whatever, they can't. They're stuck.
They can't. Yeah.
So
they take a huge loss. So, I mean, asking questions like that, I imagine in big Wall Street, mortgage finance factories like you were working in, I mean, that has to, first of all, make you very unpopular. But second of all, was that your epiphany? Was that like the first time the light bulb went on? You're like, I got to get out of here. Like, this is
started
insane.
to plant the seed. Yeah, it started to plant the seed, but I was, young, ambitious. I put my head down. I did my job.
Yeah.
I used that to catapult into a position that was higher within what was called the special assets group. We worked on the 7th floor. On the 8th floor was the securitization department. So they were the one creating all the mess.
Yeah.
And then on the 7th floor, we were
supposed to pass it down to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, basically a giant jobs program. But I saw a lot of similar shenanigans there. I saw that, the incentives were skewed. Nobody cared about second order effects. It was very self-serving. And so, that started to plant the seed. And then I stumbled upon, some of the individuals within the Agora network, including Bill Bonner and a number of others. And I don't remember exactly how I stumbled upon them, but I started reading their stuff, and it cracked my mind open, man. And I started to realize, hey, there's a big world out there. I can take the knowledge I have and the skill set I have, and I'd much rather go apply it, into an independent research where we're trying to serve individuals, opposed to just this massive corporate structure that's, basically in bed with the government. So
three things come to mind there. Let's see if I can keep all three of them straight. I'll tell you how I found out about the Agora but what you're describing, first of all, those of you who don't understand what happened in 2008, the single best source to understand it, and it's wildly entertaining, not the movie, but the book. The movie was, right, I know people...
it was pretty good. It didn't get all of it, but...
The Big Short, people think it was good, but it's too complicated. You couldn't make the book into a movie properly. The book is wildly entertaining. The narrator, in fact, if you want to have somebody read it to you, which is what I do, right, get it on Audible. It's so good, it's unbelievable. Michael Lewis, very entertaining writer, but he really captured the insanity of it. And there's actually a passage in the book itself where he says, the reason the whole thing didn't make, he's like, the reason that this whole, securitization of these mortgages doesn't make sense is because it's not supposed to make sense, right? The whole thing was like, hey, how can we just fool the regulators into rubber stamping these piles of dog shit, right? And then just sell them off to unsuspecting investors. And that's exactly what they did. But the second point I want to make is like, we are living through a time where that kind of insanity has been going on in our institutions for decades now, whether it's, there's things it's not even safe to talk about anymore. Whether it's the events of September 2001, you better not ask any questions. Why did World Trade Center 7 fall down? Well, you can't talk about that, right? Nobody's allowed to talk about that. Why are there things that don't add up? Then 2008, and it's like, all right, well, let's just get these mortgages off our books. Consequences be damned. Don't ask questions. Don't think this through. And so there's a trend. I don't know. It almost deserves its own name. But broadly speaking, it's like we have large percentages of people, most of them running our institutions, who are actually at war with reality. And the idea that you can continue to like, all right, well, let's blow up a bunch of mortgages and then we'll just pretend that it doesn't matter, right? And we'll print a bunch of money and everything will be all right. It's like, that's how we're in this situation, right? And so it's fascinating to me that, we are living through one of the really strangest times in history. And if you don't have, and here we get to, I think, the real value and the attraction from my point of view to joining the Agora I saw very quickly, there were big picture thinkers who their entire focus was to connect dots and to not lose sight of like, but all these things are happening, sort of like pattern recognition, right? For the events that were taking place. I read a book called Conversations with Casey in 2013, where it was essentially the very first book that Doug put out with, and Doug Casey is another writer. He's one of the original not a founder, but he was one of the original guys to come on in our particular branch of the Agora. And Casey Research is still around. Doug is not really part of it, although they still use his name. But I read this book, and it was conversations with a guy who was just shooting from the hip and making a lot of sense. And I read that in 2013 when I was putting an acupuncture clinic. I was trying to franchise acupuncture clinics at a hospital in Chicago. And we were this close. Like, we pitched the CFO, and the whole hospital group maybe was going to, receive one of our clinics. And then, the realization dawned on me, like, well, he was very polite to take a meeting with us, but they absolutely didn't give a shit at all, right? Because who wants to lower costs in medicine? Like, they weren't interested in that at all. And so it was a very humbling experience to go through that. But that was my introduction to the Agora. And then I discovered Bill Bonner, whose daily missives are still just delightful to read. I stop everything I'm doing whenever the guy's thing hits my inbox. And so people who don't know about Bill, the founder of the Agora, people who don't know what we're talking about, if you're interested at all in some really good high-level thinking about the events of, say, the last 20, 25 years, it's valuable to know who these people are. And I think nobody's really done a better job, top to bottom, than the Agora and some of the content and the material that they still put out. Although Bill is now separate from his company, he's gone to Substack, but you can still find his daily diary for free, and it's really worth reading. So anyway, that's what that makes me think of. And obviously, you were very happy to get out of there. And I think you got hired at the Agora just before I did, like 2016 or 17. You got there?
Yeah, I went down there in late 2016 is when I really went down and met everybody in person. Yeah, and got my start.
Nice. Yeah, those were good years. Those were very good years.
Yeah, those were great.
Yep. And so talk about then what has happened to you. Like, what have you done to start your own program to help folks? And talk about the philosophy of it too, because this is, I think, central to what it is that I'm trying to also share with people. The game has changed. The very assumptions upon which you're going to build wealth and maintain your freedom are different. Like, we're in a completely new world and a very different landscape. Talk about what you're doing and sort of what led you to create the organization that you now have started.
Yeah, a couple angles to it. Number one, working in the Agora, working in providing investment research, that's it's high quality research, but it's very generalized. We cannot in that situation, we cannot provide personalized or customized research. It's really it's high quality content, but it goes out to everybody. Everybody gets the exact same research, the exact same recommendations. And so there, I saw, kind of a gap in the market, because people, especially today with all the, all the changes that are happening very rapidly within the financial system, people want, more personalized attention. They want support. They want to have a network, especially a network of like-minded people. And so that was kind of a gap in the market that I looked at, and I said, you know what, I can do something about that, or I could at least get the ball rolling to, create an organization
it's so smart, just to sort of double down on that point. Nobody needs more information. Like, we're all dying from too much information. It's like this constant fire hose of, and you got to read this, and you want to watch that video, and you want to keep up with this person. I know I suffer from it too, but it's very smart. Like, what you're doing is very smart, because what people really want is, hey, just like help me out, like personally get with me, and I'll help you. I'll walk you through this. That's exactly what I do for people here at the Expat Files. So I came to the same conclusion, which is like, look, you don't need more information or, sort of here's how you go do this. Just come talk to me and I'll walk you through it personally and hold your hand until we're actually through to the other side. And that's kind of what you're doing. I was on your group call yesterday. And so talk to people about the sort of financial service that you put together, and how personalized the kind of attention that people get, like on the call yesterday.
Yeah, and there's that, and I'll add, there's, the finance piece is one part of it. So we come in, we've got a comprehensive training program. We've got, I believe it's over 11 hours worth of training material that's available to everybody, all our members. It starts with, the very basics of money, the monetary system, very basic personal finance. We talk about asset allocation. My philosophy and the kind of the approach that I suggest is that before you do anything, you really need to build a customized asset allocation model. And so we're talking about, deploying, when I say asset allocation, really it's a reserve. It's almost like an emergency fund, but instead of just saving money in the bank, we're deploying our funds across several asset classes, including cash. We want to have some cash, but we want to have some gold. We want to have a stock portfolio, potentially bonds, depending on the situation and individual preferences. We want to have some Bitcoin, and early stage investments is another asset class that I'm interested in. And so we walk people through all these different asset classes, how they fit into kind of an overall portfolio. Some of these asset classes exist outside of the financial system. Some don't. And I think that's important. We need to have assets outside of the financial system, but we don't necessarily need to completely get out of the system either. If there's still opportunities and, say the stock market, we can take advantage of it as long as we're, we've got everything else, kind of under control.
And so outside the system, in your case, and by the way, we should tell everybody the name of Joe's organization, the name of the club that he's put together is called the Phoenician League. He'll explain where that name came from. It's actually very interesting. But it's an entire suite of sort of done with you kind of financial education, learning, contacts, the various investments that you've gotten your people into. What is an example of something outside the financial system, right?
Yeah, well, the easiest example is just physical cash in your pocket or in the house. I think it's a good idea to have some. I know obviously there's been a big push towards a cashless society in recent years. There's also been a lot of pushback. So I think it's still important to have some cash. Obviously, gold. Gold's a big one. When we talk about gold, we're talking physical gold bullion, which bullion means it's just gold that is valued based on its weight of gold. It's not a collectible.
Coins, bars, ingots.
Yeah, coins and bars, basic coins and bars. Let's have some at home, put them in a safe, hide them in the house. Gold is universal. It's timeless. You can go into any country in this world and there's a liquid market for gold, doesn't matter where it is. So gold, and then also Bitcoin. I'm a big proponent of Bitcoin. The best way to earn Bitcoin is to provide goods and services for it. Most of us aren't in a position where we can do that. So we have to go on an exchange and buy Bitcoin, which means we have to set up an account and all that stuff. The key is you buy the Bitcoin on that exchange, get it off the exchange.
Don't leave it on the exchange.
Yeah, I've got a smartphone wallet. I mean, there's numerous of these. I use the Edge wallet. They've been around since the early days. Great team behind it, but it's self-custody, meaning once you get it on your Edge wallet, there's nothing anybody can do to freeze your account, stop your transactions, nothing. So I keep walking around money on that, but I also use a hardware wallet. I use the original, which is the Trezor, which is essentially a USB device. You plug it into your computer, move your Bitcoins onto it, then you take it out, stick it in a safe. And that's, it's the same thing as having gold in a vault.
I do the same thing.
Yeah. So those are the three ways to to keep funds.
While you're talking
outside.
about wallets, I have a desktop Exodus wallet. I don't have a mobile wallet for Bitcoin, but yeah, I agree with you. Explain to people quickly, like, why Bitcoin instead of every other possible cryptocurrency option?
Yeah, a number of reasons. I mean, to me, really there's two. Number one, it's the network effect. Bitcoin was the first. There is a huge community, not only of people who own Bitcoin, but of the developers. They're very passionate. They're very principled. Security is baked into the cake. When we talk about the size of the network, not to get too technical, but the number of people mining or the amount of computing power directed towards mining is greater in Bitcoin than any other, far greater. That provides security. It means it can't be hacked, essentially.
That's right.
That's one thing. Then you've got limited supply, 21 million Bitcoins are all that will ever exist. We've already got over 19 million of them here. So last one, though, isn't going to be mined until the year 2140. There's an algorithm specifically that governs the rate at which new Bitcoins are mined. So new Bitcoins come into the system every 10 minutes, more or less, give or take. That's not going to change. The only thing that changes is how many new Bitcoins come in to the system every 10 minutes. That decreases. It's already decreased exponentially. That's why it's going to take.
It's going to have again next year, and every 4 years after, it will continue to get cut in half. And so the important thing to understand about Bitcoin is nobody owns a network. And try as they might, no government has figured out a way to shut it down. And I just saw a piece of news this week that Hong Kong banks are now gonna open and do business with cryptos again, crypto exchanges. So that's an interesting sea change, isn't it? At the exact same time that the SEC is now finally getting around to really busting chops on this side of the world. And most of these altcoins are securities. They fit the definition of a security. You had to know that the SEC was coming for these places. They are not equity. You do not own profits in an actual profitable enterprise, like if you own shares of a company. And so they're dangerous. They are, as my other friend Nick says, they're arcade tokens is what they are. Bitcoin is different. It is truly different. It is different. It is qualitatively different than every other cryptocurrency. And I think once we have, I don't know what you see coming, Joe, but once we have some regulatory clarity, it's entirely possible that Bitcoin really it may light a fire. Like all of this regulatory stuff may actually light a fire under the Bitcoin price once again, because I think a lot of other projects are probably they're probably dead men walking at this point. But we'll see. Who knows?
I'm sure a lot of them are. Yeah, not everyone, but they're also not attacking the same use case as Bitcoin. I mean, I don't think the world realizes this yet. Bitcoin is the single best asset if you're talking about international trade or international collateral. Right now, I think U.S. Treasury bonds are used a lot in international collateral deals. Bitcoin would be far better. And especially in a world where de-dollarization is picking up, in a world where a significant part of the world wants to get away from dollars and U.S. denominated or controlled system, Bitcoin makes a lot of sense. So yeah, there's all kinds of things. And then the other thing I love about Bitcoin is we could run our entire economy on Bitcoin. Like I buy all my meat and eggs. We buy from local farmers here.
Yeah.
In Bitcoin, so whatever happens to the dollar doesn't matter. We've got that's just a microcosm, but it could be, it allows perfect freedom.
That's fantastic. Yeah. It's also, again, I like to talk philosophy here because I think correct moral philosophy goes a long way to solving problems, mostly in our personal lives. Like if you have the wrong ideas about the world and you're wildly enthusiastic about having more government, well, that's part of the problem, right? And so understanding that a currency like Bitcoin also diminishes the government's ability to commit force and fraud, to coerce people. If they don't have control over your money and they don't have control over Bitcoin, then that's a net positive for the world. That's actually a very positive thing that government, people think of the government as somehow like it's this disembodied entity. The government is a bunch of people, right? And a lot of them are assholes. And the reason they're assholes is because they go to government so that they can use force and fraud against other people. And that's essentially what the government is.
It attracts sociopaths.
Yeah, it attracts those kinds of psychopaths and sociopathic personalities. Politics is the study of how violence will be applied inside a given geographic region. That's what it is. And so you have to have the right understanding of what these actual entities and societal institutions are based on. And Bitcoin creates a kindler, gentler world based on trade, based on win-win deals, based on commerce. And that brings us to, this concept of win-win. Bill Bonner, the founder of the Agora, wrote a book on exactly that topic. Everything he writes is really about the importance of win-win deals. But it was also the basis of why you named your new project the Phoenician League.
Yeah, so the Phoenician League, the name is derived from the ancient Phoenician civilization, which was a commercial civilization, as well as the Hanseatic League of the Middle Ages. So it's kind of a play on both of those entities, I guess. And the Phoenicians, I doubt many people are familiar with who they are, but these were, a group of people that lived in biblical times. They were in modern day Lebanon is where they were originated, modern day Lebanon today. But while everybody else was kind of waging war against each other and conquering their neighbor and taking their stuff and enslaving their men and all those things that, were going on, the Phoenicians were creating trade networks throughout the Mediterranean. They connected East Asia, North Africa, and parts of Western Europe with the Mediterranean. They created trade networks. They'd bring, your purple dye and all your silk from Asia, and they'd bring other goods from here and there. And but the great thing about it, the cool thing about it was, it wasn't just about the transport of goods or the exchange of goods. It was about the free flow of ideas and information and cultural exchange. And I firmly believe that is what's necessary for human civilization to continue to become more sophisticated, more civil, shall I say, more advanced. It's about ideas spreading. And that's a big part of what the Phoenicians did. Hanseatic League was the same thing. They're in the Middle Ages. This was an independent group of city-states that got together. They created their own code of law called the Law Merchant, or the Lex Mercatoria. And they were independent from the kings and the nobles. And so they had, a system of rules that everybody adhered by to ensure that transactions were voluntary, people were treated well, all those things. And so that's really what we're trying to revive.
Modern day Germany, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. And a lot of it. Yeah. Northern Germany. Yeah.
Yeah. So, just to highlight, because again, right, we're living at a time where, especially the last 3 years, have really highlighted how poorly thought out so many people are. And this is not a criticism. I think people don't take the time to think through, but why do win-win deals matter? Well, because you have
also, it's nowhere in the public education system anyway.
It's nowhere taught, right? You have to be a business person to actually understand the importance. Is the only way I get paid is if I can do something valuable for somebody else. That's very different than I work in the government. Let's go make a bunch of fake money, right? Like if you and I make fake money and put it in the system, it's called counterfeiting, and you go to jail for it. But the government hits a few computer keys, right? And suddenly $1 trillion appears, and then they go start a war, right? And so it's a much, much better system when wealth depends on your ability to provide goods and services that other people will pay for voluntarily. I don't think that message, it's where do you actually hear that message? Well, you hear it in places like this. You hear it from Bill Bonner. You hear it from people who have thought through these issues. But the strange thing about the Phoenicians, of course, created the alphabet that we use today. But oddly enough, right, they didn't leave a ton of written records. I mean, there's some, but basically they were busy doing business, weren't they? I mean, their whole thing was to set up these trade routes and to find ways to provide valuable goods, mostly, but also ideas, right, from one part of the world and transmit that somewhere else and get something in return, and take olive oil from this part of the world and bring it and get whatever goods were available on the coast of Spain, right, et cetera, et cetera. And right, that this free flow of goods created this free flow of ideas. And obviously the previous, prior to, say, the 20th century, or somewhere in the 500 years since the Enlightenment, the entire financial model, right, that all countries followed was kill everybody and, steal the women and cattle and the gold and get everything you can. And war was a very profitable venture so long as you were on the winning side. But at some point, right, we now live at a time where it's very, very destructive. War is so destructive, there's absolutely no winner. And we can't afford to have wars. And maybe that's a good thing, because it will bring everybody to their senses. But if you start blowing stuff up and breaking shit and killing people, right? Things get out of control really, really quickly. And we're also at a stage where we have the technology, we have the weaponry to cause damage that we can't recover from. And so how do you put a stop to that, right? If you're not going to change people's minds and actually change the psychology of the human animal to say, wait a second, this is really stupid. Like, we should do stuff that benefits each other. Even across, the sort of rabid anti-Russian kind of sentiment that's going on right now is, of course, all based on very hypocritical kind of thinking. I mean, obviously the Russians don't put troops on the border with Brownsville, Texas. So why should NATO be encroaching closer and closer to their border? It's very silly. What if we did win-win deals instead? Wouldn't the world be a richer and better place? And the answer is obviously. And so we're living through a time when we know better. We know better than what's actually taking place. Even some of the ideas that are playing out today, you look at even the last 100 years, it's like, but we already tried that. Like, people in Europe tried these socialist ideas, and they don't work. And we already know they don't work because a bunch of people
they just didn't do it right, Tane. They didn't do it right.
They didn't do it hard enough. Yeah, exactly. And so, my message is to young people. I deal with all kinds here at the Expat Files, but I hope that this message really comes across, that young people you should structure your own personal philosophy to be in accord with the kind of thinking that produces prosperity. And that if you get your moral life correctly, if you get your moral philosophy sort of in line with what will produce a worthwhile life and a prosperous life and a win-win kind of environment around you, you're halfway there in life. You really are. And so I tip my hat to you for doing what you're doing. The call yesterday was very revealing to get a chance to actually see some of the people who are in the Phoenician League, who are investing alongside you, who are doing the kind of deals. Will you talk about, especially now, like the main dish I know has to do with good old fashioned residential real estate. Talk about some of the specifics.
Yeah, I will. I just want to add one comment though, first, when you talk about moral philosophy. Jesus of Nazareth had the golden rule, right? Treat people as the way you want to be treated yourself. I've read, and I firmly believe, in every culture, the moral philosophers have come to some variation of that exact same principle. And it is so simple. It is a simple thing in the world. And that's, anyway, so yeah, I love it. I love it.
It's not complicated. Yeah. And the silver rule is don't do things to other people that you don't want them doing to you, which is equally valuable.
What we teach our kids. They understand it.
Exactly.
Implement. So getting back to the kind of the financial piece of the Phoenician League. So we start with kind of the asset allocation model, but that's not retirement funds. That's not building a nest egg for retirement. None of that stuff. That's just emergency funds, security, some of which outside the system. Then we help people start to build passive income, because passive income is how you liberate yourself. It's how you get out of a situation where, you have to spend your time working for money or perhaps doing things that you really don't believe in or really don't want to do. So we've got a network. Well, number one, first, we've got all the training, the ins and outs of real estate. I know there's a lot of barriers to entry or perceived barriers to entry. We break all those down in our training. We talk about exactly how to analyze properties, how to go about it, how to build investment criteria, how to manage it, how to run it through LLCs, how to be as incredibly tax advantaged as possible. And real estate it's a tax haven in the US. You don't pay
real
tax.
Estate is the best. I'm in Puerto Rico, right? You can beat the IRS by moving to Puerto Rico. It's not a prison sentence. It's not too bad, right? But if you're not going to move to the Caribbean, probably the single best thing you can do is to really, really master the real estate thing. And the training is excellent, guys. I haven't even been through it all, but even just the small part that I've seen. But the other thing I want to highlight for the audience, Joe, is again, it's not just information you're providing. Like, we got a chance to hear yesterday from somebody who would literally just take you by the hand and walk you through, here's how we're going to put this together and do this deal for you. And I think it's like, if you think about buying real estate and earning a yield from your property and that you don't know the first thing about it, the first thing you need to do and understand is you can do it. You can do it. Other people have done it. Joe's put together just a phenomenal training and also a sort of done with you kind of model where you have just excellent professionals who are really, really, what I saw, this is very, very high level kind of expertise and really top tier kind of service to just take people by the hand and say, okay, here's how you're going to buy your first property. Here's how you need to run the numbers. These are the things you need to know. all of that stuff was covered, which is really just outstanding.
Yeah, and we've got the network. We've got a network in multiple, more than a few, I mean, probably 12 or 13 top tier US cities where we've got brokers on the ground, we've got lenders in the area, we've got property managers there that we've vetted, that we work with. We've got a master insurance policy, and we source deals. We've got relationships with new home builders in these markets and with the rehabbers, you know, whether that's just a little mom and pop that goes and buys an old home and fixes it up and sells it, or whether it's a company that does that at scale. So we source deals, and we've got an online property portal where, you know, the deals to get into our network, they've got to meet very strict criteria in terms of the quality of the property. It's got to either be new or it's got to be recently rehabbed and renovated. It's got to be in good neighborhoods, and it's got to be a situation where it's going to cash flow from day one. And we talk to our property managers. I mean, our goal, and typically what we can do, is we get a tenant in these properties before somebody closes on them. So you just start making money day one. But you know, so we've got strict criteria, and then it creates a situation where we can kind of do a little arbitrage. So if you're in one market and property values go up, well, you can potentially lock in some gains in that market, roll them in tax-free through a 1031 exchange, and buy in another market where you can get more properties, prices haven't gone up, and you can accelerate your cash flow that way. So our goal with the Phoenician League, and I mean this sincerely, is to help everybody work up to $10,000 a month or more in passive income through rental real estate. And it's as easy. I'll add one more thing. This, you know, I take it for granted, but you don't ever have to leave your house doing it this way. We show you how to make it almost as easy as buying a stock. I mean, you're going to have to send some emails and talk with some people, but that's it. Even when you go to close, we're going to send a mobile notary to your house with all the documents, and they're going to notarize while you sign. Or you can meet them at your office or the coffee shop or wherever. And you can do that because we've got the professionals in these networks, and we've got a very large network. It's such that everybody's incentive is aligned. These professionals know that we are their largest client. If they don't do a good job for us, we're out. And then they lose the majority of their business. So
wow. And you put this together. That's really
so. Yeah, so I didn't put together the entire real estate network. We're plugging into that, but I put together kind of all the relationships and the logistics.
Yeah. And you plug people into this. I mean, that's just amazing. It's congratulations, honestly. It's a fantastic thing to have done, but also hearing from the people last night, hearing what folks had to say, like the intelligence level of the people on there. And again, you know, if you've never done anything like buying a piece of property and turning it into a sort of cash producing asset, this is where I would go. Anybody can do this. If you think of yourself as capable of learning something new, if you think of yourself as capable, like the way I think about new skills, anything, whether it's writing or when I first showed up at the Agora or doing something like we're doing now, it's like, well, other people have done this. I can do it too. I'll figure it out too. And I think if you have that growth mentality, the idea that, well, maybe I don't know enough now, but I could, right? So let's get busy learning what we need to learn. Joe's Phoenician League is really a one-stop shop. And again, it's not just a bunch of learning, like the support is there to also make you a real expert. Again, at probably certainly one of the best wealth building skills that you can develop for your life, which is just owning real estate.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden the idea of retirement goes away.
Right.
The idea that you build up all these financial assets and you try to get to this number so you can retire. Well, if you just build income streams with real estate,
build income,
you know, whenever you get to a point to where you've got enough income to cover your expenses,
quit your job.
Retire now. You know,
yeah,
and
exactly.
You spend your time doing whatever you want, and your portfolio is still going to grow because you know, it builds upon itself, and you're getting tremendous tax breaks.
I remember when I hit, you know, 10,000 a month, and which I thought would never happen, you know, certainly while you're struggling to do it, you know, you think that day is never going to come. But when you do hit a milestone where you think, actually, I am free now. How about that? You know, like it is a real cause for celebration. I want to also talk about, so like you mentioned, like, so real estate, passive income, right? Yep. Done correctly, you can make a tremendous, and you have an asset that if you want to sell it later, you'd also, you could ring the register again.
And you can just sell it right back into our network. You've got investors right here, you know.
You have buyers like ready. Yeah, that's another great benefit of what you put together for people. But talk about Like, obviously, we worked at a newsletter publisher where there's all kinds of stock picking. What do you see as, and you said, like, it's not necessarily, you don't have to sell all your stocks and go all cash and like huddle in the basement with your ammo and your canned goods. Whatever's coming, there will be a financial system. What do you like in terms of sectors? What kind of stocks? Like, what you mentioned bonds, like in what situation would you buy bonds? Like, talk about traditional financial instruments for people who are, also looking at, okay, well, how would I set my life up? And how would I build wealth? And does this even play into the passive income idea?
Yeah. So I'll touch on bonds first, just because I'm not interested in bonds right now. But with what I think is coming, we're going to have an avalanche of corporate bankruptcies. Some corporate bonds of good companies that aren't going to go bankrupt are going to be mispriced. And from my perspective, that's the time when you it might make sense to buy a bond. If you can buy a great company's bond at a significant discount, that's when I'm interested. But we're not there yet. Within the equity markets, I think there is a tremendous opportunity in energy right now. I want exposure to oil. I want exposure to natural gas, and I want exposure to uranium, which is nuclear fission, feeds nuclear fission technology. So I'm sure, as I know, and I'm sure many listeners know, there's been a tremendous push towards the ESG stuff, environmental, social governance nonsense, that, they're saying, well, we're going to go carbon emission free and we're going to get rid of traditional energy production, all these things. It's not going to happen. It can't happen within the current structure. It's not going to happen. So, and there's been tremendous efforts right now as we speak to put a lid on the price of oil. This is part of all the geopolitical stuff. But I mean, number one, they drained the Strategic Petroleum Reserve specifically to push oil prices down. They've changed the weighting within the U.S. benchmarks, which are the West Texas Intermediate and the Brent crude. They've fiddled with those ratings to try to artificially suppress the oil price. And then, of course, they're almost certainly involved in the futures markets where they can, short a bunch of paper contracts for gold that they never intend to, take delivery on or anything like that to help push down the price of oil. So I think there's been a lot of distortions. Then you've got, these idiots have blown up, refineries and pipelines and stuff. And, so they've created a lower supply of oil and certainly natural gas. In the US, there's several companies that are rushing to build out the infrastructure to ship natural gas overseas. And then, of course, uranium, or I should say nuclear fission, is magical technology. If we discovered this today, we'd think it's magic. And it doesn't even produce carbon emissions that these people beat their chest about, but they still demonize it. So great opportunities there. I'll tell you the other areas I'm interested in if you want, but it looked like you may have wanted to comment or.
No, I was just going to say, I'm very long oil. Some of these oil companies too, they're spitting out, 10, 12, 15% dividends, some even higher. But this is a situation where the narrative has made even institutional investors very wary. Nobody wants to put money because you're not allowed to drill for new oil and all the rest. All of this is false. And again, it's another example of it's like there's this thing out there called reality, right? And there's no way that the world's going to run on, sunlight, solar panels, and wind power. It's just not going to happen. We're not there yet. It's a seductive narrative. Everybody wants it to be true. Young people are, taping themselves to famous artworks, trying to protest oil. But the fact is, like, all of the entire civilization is based on cheap energy. And you only have to study this long enough to understand how false the whole green narrative is, which is not to say that we shouldn't pollute less. We should pollute less. It would be very nice if we lived in a world where there wasn't plastic in the oceans and all the rest. And we do have that. Like, nuclear is the way to get to a world like that. But that too has a narrative that's very maligned about how dangerous it is, and we're all going to die from nuclear poisoning and all the rest. And it's like, no, actually, it's very, very safe, right? And there are ways to keep it safe and make it safe. Fukushima disasters notwithstanding, right? You can still do this in a way that makes sense. But the narrative is completely counter to reality. And it's created these tremendous, tremendous buying opportunities. I think you're correct. I see oil could go to, $200 to $500, and these companies are still going to be pumping it at their max capacity. And who knows? I mean, I'm not trying to make predictions. I'm not a financial analyst here, but I do pay attention to human psychology and the unbelievable nonsense that we've seen in the last several years is nothing but, if you're an investor, right, you have to look at energy as being very, very smart place to be right now. The entire civilization is based on this. It's probably not going to disappear. And if it does, we have way bigger problems, right?
That's an important point to make. When you talk about, if you wanted to say we're not going to have traditional energy, we're going to run everything on renewables, solar and wind. If that's a lot of people pushing that idea, that necessarily would, at the best case scenario, relegate billions of people on this planet to subsistence living, to absolute poverty. It might require a very big portion of them to die.
Exactly.
Anti-human.
Right? A bunch of people are going to be dead.
It is anti-human, that push. Then the other thing, if you'll notice how all of a sudden the banks are pushing back against the ESG stuff. They virtue signaled for a few years, but I mean, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon, in his annual letter and in other instances, has been very adamant.
We're buying, we're funding oil, exactly.
Yeah, and oil and gas. So we can see the tide starting to turn. So I think energy is a big opportunity in the equity markets. I also love property and casualty insurance, and I'll tell you why. This is possibly the best business on the planet. So if you think about it, property and casualty insurance, the big money's in the enterprise level stuff, but it's easy to explain in the retail stuff. So we all buy homeowners insurance and car insurance. Okay, we buy homeowners insurance just in case our house burns down, right? And we buy car insurance in case we get into an accident. We hope none of those things ever happen, and they almost never do. My house has never burned down. I don't know anybody whose house has burned down, but we all have homeowners insurance. Large corporations do the same thing. They're insuring their buildings, their assets, their equipment, their labor force. They're insuring against being sued and work claims and all these other things. So this is a business where we pay the insurance company for a potential service that they haven't provided yet, and they may never have to provide. I can't think of any other business in the world where you get paid and you might never have to do anything for the money you just got.
The word is float. Yep.
Yeah, and that's the key. So they're matching up, and they've got this down to a science where they're looking at their revenue and they're projecting their expenses. And if they're good at that, they can create what's called the float, which is the difference. They get more money coming in than they'll need to pay out. That's their float. Then they invest it. And if they invest it wisely, not only did they get the revenue, but now they can generate a return on the revenue. And so I love property and casualty insurance. And we have very specific analytical tools and valuation metrics where we can see at any given time which insurance companies are doing a good job at underwriting, at the actuarial stuff, at investing the float. And then we can invest in just the best ones. Not every single property and casualty insurance company is good, but the top tier ones are, if you can buy them at the right price at the right time, they're a cornerstone of a great equity portfolio.
So, Buffett's favorite investment. Yep.
It is. That's how Buffett made his money. I mean, he bought Geico, and that started everything for him.
That started everything. Yeah. Porter Stansberry has spilled oceans of ink about the importance of understanding insurance companies, why they should be a cornerstone of everybody's portfolio long term, because it is the greatest business in the world. They essentially get free money from huge swaths of people. Like here in Puerto Rico, we have to have obviously hurricane insurance is the big thing. And so you look at how much money has to go into these companies, and essentially they get to play with all this money if they do a good job. Obviously, it's a cash guzzling operation, no question.
Yeah, and then the other area I'm interested in is bleeding edge technology, and this is difficult because I'm not saying the entire tech sector, but there are companies that are doing some really phenomenal things that if they get it right, if they pull off what they're doing, it's going to be, world changing. It's going to be an incredible, they're going to make tons of money. So those things are more, smaller allocations. It's more like almost like the venture capital approach, where you get a couple of these and you understand they're not all going to work out, but all you need is one or two to hit it, and you're going to hit it big.
Those speculations, right? Whereas, so
we add speculations into
yes, that's good. There's a semiconductor company that has produced a normal chip run the speed, I guess, or the bits that it runs. Like this computer is like a 16-bit chip, and that's pretty fast. For a modern computer, that's sort of average or whatever. There's a company that has put together a chip, and it's tested, and it works. It actually works. Like they've gone public. that's running it's a 2056-bit chip. It's a tremendous leap. And I don't know if this is going to work out, but I just found out about it. I'll tell you about it off the air. But yeah, that kind of thing where obviously we live at a time where technology is so impressive. Most of these companies will blow up, AI companies, right? They're going to take investor money and do absolutely nothing with it except lose it. But if you do find a good tech company with something that's truly breakthrough and it can scale and it actually works and like the whole thing comes together, my God, I mean, obviously I was just reading and studying something about Uber. And, you know, if you understand like what a game-changing technology that is, you know, to allow people to just take their idle cars and make money with them, no wonder it was such a highly valuable thing. And if you look at it, it's like, what's the expense? It's an app, right? It's an app and the ability to promote it in as many places as possible. So we live at a time when you can just make phenomenal wealth, right? If you understand the technology the right way and find the right play.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Nice. What haven't we covered? What's your take on the banking situation? I mean, you worked inside a big bank. How screwed are the banks, and how much more carnage are we likely to see?
Yeah, okay, this is interesting, man. I might have a different perspective on this than a lot of people that run in our circle. So, you know, we just saw the big, you're kind of referring to the big banking collapses we just saw, you know?
Yes. Yep.
Is that right? Yeah. So
correct.
You look at those, there was a commonality among the banks that failed. Okay. They were all under the purview of the San Francisco Fed, right? And some banks underneath the purview of the New York Fed were permitted to buy their assets at a discount. JP Morgan was the big benefactor, right? Now, why did those banks fail? Why did they collapse? Frankly, I mean, they collapsed because there was a bank run. There's an old-fashioned bank run. Depositors rushed to pull their money out because they were under the impression that the banks were in financial trouble. So what was the trouble? The trouble was what's called in the industry a duration mismatch. And so every bank holds U.S. Treasury bonds amongst other assets, but U.S. Treasury bonds are a big one. They have these, they own these bonds. They are holding them to maturity. So the way bonds work, you buy the bond, which is essentially a loan to the entity. The entity pays you coupon payments, which is interest, periodically. And then at maturity, the entity pays you the face value of your bond. You get the money back, okay? But there's a market, you know, to create a market for these bonds, the bonds always have a market price that's fluctuating. And that's tied to interest rates. You know, when rates go up, bond prices go down. That's if you were to sell the bond. You don't have to. But if you were to sell the bond and interest rates have gone up because your bond's paying a lower interest rate, it's not worth as much in the market. And so what happened with these banks is that the market value of their bond portfolios plummeted given the interest rate increases over the last, 12, 16 months, whatever it's been. Market value plummeted. That only matters if you have to sell. They weren't planning to sell. If you hold to maturity, it doesn't matter what the market value is. You get the face value. So fundamentally, now, let me clarify something. The fractional reserve banking system itself is inherently stable. But within this system that we have, okay, those banks were not in trouble, right? They were only in trouble because of a bank run. Okay. Now, let me ask you this question. How many of us are looking at our bank periodically and saying, what's their duration match look like? How many of us are looking at their financials and saying, what's their asset versus liabilities look like? None of us, right?
Nobody.
Why was there a bank run? Right? It's very clear to me that this was an operation. Somebody seeded that bank run. Somebody caused a panic because none of us are looking at this stuff. And had nobody rushed to pull their money out, those banks would have been fine. They would have held those assets to maturity.
So who's behind that? I mean, you want to speculate on that? Like why,
yes, I do.
why SVB?
Yes, I do. So this is a hypothesis that I formed last year, trying to make sense of everything that was happening within the financial system and what the Fed was doing and everything else. I formed this hypothesis, and this is something that it wasn't original to me. Somebody actually in a mastermind network suggested the idea to me. The more I thought about it and the more I put it out there, the more it made sense. But this is something that with every month that's passed, the data I have seen seems to confirm this hypothesis. So I will submit to you that there's a financial war raging right now between two factions of the existing power structure
inside the US.
Internationally, globally.
Internationally as well.
But within the Western world, these are
within the Western world. Yep.
Yes, within the Western world, outside of Russia, China, like forget about that for a minute, because there are power structures there too. But within the Western world, you've got what I call the globalist faction, the globalist power structure. These are the institutions or the people who own or behind like the multinational institutions such as the European Central Bank, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, of course, the World Economic Forum, which is the mouthpiece for these people, the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control. The list goes on and on and on.
Globally,
okay,
that's
the faction. In 2020, they came out with their plan, the Great Reset, right? And their Great Reset is basically, the goal is to overthrow whatever's left of the legacy capitalist system and replace it with their, what I call neo-feudalist system, where they usurp all the power between the money and financing engine. They want to take control of money and finance, bring it under the roof of the institutions they control. This is what the central bank digital currency push is about, the CBDC push, right? And I know you're familiar with that. I'm sure a lot of listeners are. The idea behind the CBDC is that we don't have a bank account anymore. We've got a digital wallet at the central bank institution. And now all of a sudden, there's a lot of people pushing back against this. They're saying, well, now, they can see all our transactions. They could freeze our transactions, freeze our account.
Coerce you because they don't like what you said online or what have you, right? Which is very dystopian. If you don't understand the CBDC thing, you need to understand it. It's very, very ugly kind of reality.
It is, but that is not the goal. That is not the goal. And in fact, while it would make it easier for them to do that, they could do that today. Our credit card transactions are an open book. Our bank accounts, the same thing. They could freeze those if they want. This would just remove a step. I don't think that's the purpose of the CBDC. The purpose is to basically steal the entire function of global finance from the commercial banks, okay?
Subvert the commercial banks. Exactly.
Yeah, how do the banks finance all the projects and the companies, everything they do? They have to have deposits, right? They need deposits to finance anything. So if you take all those deposits away and you put them over here, what's left of the banks?
What's left of the
now we get back to the ESG stuff, right? And everything else they want to do. None of that's economical. That's why it's not going to happen within the current system. The commercial banks are competitive. If they make bad loans, they lose power, wealth, and influence to the banks who didn't. And just like we saw with SVB, JP Morgan got to buy all the good assets they had for pennies on the dollar, right? So JP Morgan wins when SVB loses. That's the banking system. It's competitive, so they can't finance uneconomical projects. What the globalist faction is trying to do, I believe, is gain control of financing to eliminate the competition. So now if they've got a monopoly, they can say, well, we're going to finance 100% green energy. We're getting rid of oil. We're getting rid of all this other stuff. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's no consequences other than, there's vast consequences to all of us in civilization, but there's no consequences to their organization. So I think that's what it's about. So I believe you want to pipe in for a minute?
It makes good sense. No, it makes very, very good sense. You said something about fractional reserve. It's like, on the one hand, it is inherently dangerous because if everybody does want their money back, there's no way the money is actually at the bank. But you said, but it's actually stable because that never happens, or it almost never happens, that everybody needs their deposits back. Right. And so the fractional reserve system, of course, it works, but it works based on the confidence in the system. Like nobody has
any. I'm not a proponent of the fractional reserve system. Don't get me wrong, but as long as nobody wants their money back, the system does work.
Right, of course. Obviously,
there are flaws and it disadvantages certain people,
Yeah, for decades. But I mean, that's a fascinating. It's what you're saying makes sense, and it actually better explains what's going on. But what it means, and this is where everything, because I read your stuff, everything becomes very, very interesting and very almost ironic and amusing, right? Yes. Which is that in effect, right, the New York banking cartel, the people who run the commercial banks, let's say JP Morgan's CEO, Jamie Dimon, is really, let's say, the face of that, right? And the mouthpiece in some ways. Certainly he's obviously the best known and the biggest, maybe the greatest, head commercial bank CEO of all time, is really now, right, on the side of people like you and me. I mean,
in a sense, because they woke up to this and they said, hold on. No, you're not taking the banking system from us.
Yeah,
This is our system.
Yeah, right. We're not
We've got our
we're not
vacations in the,
CBDC
you
either,
know,
which is
we're
funny.
not giving up. Yeah, exactly. And so I think they've broken ranks. And what's really interesting here is that the Federal Reserve, the Fed, who I also do not support, but they are on the side of the New York banks. And at least under Jerome Powell, this is interesting because Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke were 100% in the globalist camp. My understanding is Bernanke is just an empty suit academic. Yellen is fervently, she's
the idea that this guy got a Nobel Prize for what he did, right? And this whole book, like with no irony, his whole book is about having the courage to act. And, you know, it's like, I can be a central banker if all you have to do is print money anytime something goes wrong. I'm pretty sure the guy ain't brave, but anyway, I mean, yeah, just the silliness of it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So you look at Bernanke and you look at Yellen, they were academics, right? They didn't have they didn't have much money coming in. But what happened? They pushed the globalist agenda, right? When they were at the Fed, and they get their book deals and they get their 6-figure and 7-figure consultations and their all that stuff. They made their money after they were at the Fed because they were good foot builders, right?
Yep.
Jerome Powell is different. Jerome Powell's a Wall Street guy. He made $100 million. His net worth is $100 million. He made that on Wall Street before becoming the Federal Reserve Chair. He doesn't need their money. Same thing with the head of the New York Fed, John Williams. Both Williams came in 2018. Somehow it got through their process. They're New York guys, New York banking guys, Wall Street guys. They've got money, right? And they're 100% on the side of the New York banks. And so the two factions are pushing against each other. This is why the Fed raised rates so aggressively last year. It had nothing to do with consumer price inflation. It had everything to do with basically draining the globalist faction of the liquidity in the euro dollar market. So this is a pretty, the rabbit hole goes deep here, but euro dollar is a massive market. It's basically dollars in offshore bank accounts, but it's not beholden. These dollars aren't beholden to the US regulatory system. And so the ECB and some of these institutions, they'll leverage euro dollars in their banking systems overseas to finance the projects and things that they want to finance. So the Fed, by raising rates, drained the Eurodollar market. And basically it was an attack on the global structure. And you remember last November, the United Nations came out, and this is another globalist institution I didn't mention. The United Nations came out and they said, all central banks need to stop raising rates.
That's right. They were
directed at the Fed.
Yep.
Yeah, directed at the Fed. Very next meeting, Jerome Powell says, now 50 more basis points. Let's go. We're going to keep going. Right. Yeah. The battle is raging. So I think that's what's happening. So I think the bank collapses, right? Why did no other banks collapse? Why did they, they put together the bank term funding program, which is basically unlimited FDI and FDIC, and banks have been drawing hundreds of billions of dollars from it. How come those banks get that money, but they let these other banks fail? I think it's all part of the same war. Yep. And again, the San Francisco Fed is very much in the globalist camp. The New York Fed is not. So it all seems to fit together if you look at it holistically, and you got to look at the incentives. This is the key thing. All I'm doing is look at incentives. And if you do so, it makes sense.
That's good stuff. Man. Yeah, that's really good stuff. Yeah. It reminds me, and it seems like it's worthwhile to point it out, everyone, of course, is distracted. We're all distracted all the time. If you watch a kind of mainstream narrative, right, there's a war going on between Russia and Ukraine, and like you're supposed to care about these players in this conflict, and you have to think this way. Sort of, this is what people are programmed and sort of ordered to do and to obey and to go along with and all the rest. But the war is actually something very, very different. The war is between people with political power and the rest of us, people who have to obey sort of the deciders. And it is strange that, as the old saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that the New York banks, right, who certainly have made plenty of money, both licit and illicit profits throughout our lifetime, are actually on the side of regular people. I mean, in this battle,
in this scenario,
they actually are on the side of
and they're not doing it for us. They're doing it for themselves.
They're doing it for their own self.
I mean, they care about us, or they're good or noble.
They're against centralization. They're against central planning. They're against a group of very, very limited number of globalist wankers and elite people.
To an extent, anyway.
to an extent, right?
They like
Right.
their centralization. They don't want
Yeah,
somebody else
exactly.
to
They want their own
centralize it.
centralization, right? But their centralization is less centralized than the globalists would like it to be. But it's going to be interesting because Klaus Schwab's 87 or however. These people are ancient, like Janet Yellen. I mean,
reptiles live a long time though, don't they, man?
reptiles live a long time. You have a good point there. But I mean, the whole thing is going to play out. It appears like in our lifetime, in this decade, you're going to see all kinds of fireworks. So, what do you expect to happen next? We're going to wrap this up. I don't want it to go on too long for people, but I'm fascinated. What do you expect to happen next? And sort of what are you doing personally, you and your family, you to protect your family? How do you see this playing out? Like, just give us a scenario here. What does the 2020s look like broadly and also for you personally?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot, and I think there's really three potential outcomes. If this hypothesis is correct, and I firmly believe it is, I've not seen anything to refute it. In fact, everything seems to keep strengthening it. But if this is correct, I think there's three logical scenarios. I think we're kind of in a holding period right now. We're probably the next 12 to 24 months is probably just going to kind of go on just as it has, for the last 6 months or so. But the three outcomes are dependent upon who basically wins this financial war. So if obviously if the globalists win, if they are successful in usurping the engines of finance and mitigating or getting rid of the commercial banks, and then it's all in on the Great Reset and all the energy stuff, and then the 15-minute cities they want to do, and I mean it's just the neo-feudalism, right?
A nightmare.
If the New York banks win, I mean it's I know you're familiar with Ludwig von Mises, and he talked about what happens when you start printing money and you start artificially lowering interest rates. You create this fake boom, but to maintain that boom, you've got to either keep doing this until you destroy the currency and the economy, or you've got to stop and you've got to allow a recession to occur, allow the debt and the malinvestment to be liquidated, which sucks for a lot of people. It's not pleasant, but it's what has to happen. So if the New York banks win, and based on what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from what they're kind of signaling, I think they're willing to, they've already raised rates. They're willing to let them stay there. They might raise them a little bit more. They're willing to let the recession happen. They're willing.
They're winning.
Explicitly said
the New York cartel is winning, essentially.
Right now. Yeah. It'd be a recession, it'd clear out all these zombie companies, and we get back to the corporate bankruptcy stuff. Like we'd see an avalanche of corporate bankruptcies, see all kinds of things. But that would sow the seeds for potentially some semblance of sanity coming back. And it would sow the seeds for something of a healthy economic recovery in which small business and individuals could potentially, have some type of renaissance, potentially. I mean, it would clear the path for that. What would happen afterwards, we don't know, but it could be a path back to the old normal.
Yeah, there's a lot of wild cards.
But then there's the third scenario, right? If it becomes clear that the New York banks are going to win, we growing up, I'm sure you're the same as me. There's been plenty of times we used to go out. I mean, we grew up, we were playing outside all the time, right? Playing ball, playing hide and seek, kick the can, whatever it is. I'm sure just as much as I do. Every now and then you'd come across a guy who is a sore loser, right? And when he starts to lose, he's complaining about it. And when you tell him, hey, toughen up, man, whatever, what's he do? He throws a temper tantrum. He takes
the game.
And he goes home, he ruins it. He says, well, if I can't win, nobody can. I'm messing this up for everybody. So the third scenario, if the New York banks clearly are going to win, if the globalist power structure is as sociopathic as I think they are, they could take their ball and go home, except the problem is they have control over all the nuclear weapons and all the advanced weaponry.
That's right.
They could torch the world and say, well, if we can't have it our way, nobody's going to have it their way either. That is
very dangerous.
Scary. That's scary.
It's very dangerous. Yep.
So what we're doing and what we have been doing, I mean, I know you have too. We could kind of see this stuff coming a decade ago. We didn't know how it was going to play out, but we could see kind of that, hey, this is not a direction we should be going in. So I've bought about 10 years ago now, I've bought 5 acres of land way up in the mountains of Virginia. I am very rural, so there are two towns near me. One's 20 minutes to the north, one's 20 minutes to the south. In the town to the north, the population is 2,000 people. The town to the south, population is like 7,000 people. You know, and there's some other homes around me, but there's otherwise nothing. So we're rural. I've got a whole home generator tied to the house. I've got a massive 500-gallon propane tank feeding that generator. It could run the whole house for about 30 days if we needed to. Then we've got backup energy. The office here is running totally on solar power.
Nice.
Completely off the grid. So I'll rag on ESG and trying to run
you got a Starlink dish on your roof?
So I applied. They haven't got back to me yet.
Oh wow!
I do have fiber optic internet running right to the house. But
yeah.
I like the idea of the satellite because it's just a resiliency backup.
We're on satellite here. We actually got rid of our cable internet. It's much better.
It's good quality these days, isn't it?
It's great. It's very fast. Yeah, it works awesome. It can't see through clouds. So if you're in a storm, you'll lose connectivity, but it's not a big deal. Obviously, it's just that part, like it can't see through rain clouds very well. So then, but I mean, it's very fast. It's up and running. It's way more reliable than anything you get. I mean, it's Puerto Rico. We lose the power like every couple of days. So
yeah. So we've got that. We've got backup energy sources. We've got propane tanks, and I've got a wood stove and all that stuff. We've got some food storage. We've got plenty of provision. Like pretty much everything we use on a daily basis. I've got.
Bravo.
But I don't want to get into the doom mindset though. That's not what it's about. It's just about having precautions and resiliency. The bigger thing to me is we have gone out and we've networked with all the local agriculture community here. We're buying meat and eggs directly from people raising them right on the site. We buy produce too when it's in season, but it's not in season all the time.
Fantastic.
And so we built kind of a resilient community. And one of my closest neighbors, a couple acres away, they raise chickens. They'll bring us eggs, and they've got goats and all these things. We'll get raw milk,
oh wow,
cows, and I've not tried goat milk yet. You can, but so we've got a community to where, if the worst should happen, we're in a position where hey, we'll power through and we'll figure it out. So I think. More important than the mindset of I've got to hoard and stockpile and everything. I think to some degree, I think that's wise to a certain extent.
Yeah.
The doomsday prepper where you get
a few months. Yeah, get a few months so that you can sleep easy, right? I mean, the obvious things are food and water and a little bit of energy to keep your house running. Depending on where you are, obviously we don't need anything. We just run a fan at night. That's a solar system. So we're basically good there too, but and we have an entire pool. If we need to suck it through a life straw, we could probably do that for a couple of months as well. And we have a water tank on the roof and same thing. But I agree with you. What you've done that makes you really ahead of the curve and really smart. That's why I'm so happy. I get a chance to talk to people like you. It's such a good example. No, now once you have a few things in place and you have you stock the larder and you have a reasonable chance to keep yourself going for a few months, let's say. The next thing is build a network.
You got to
build a bunch of people who know how to, who can also pull their weight in tough times. And that's just great. I know the part of the country that you're in, because obviously I also lived in Virginia for a number of years. And what a great spot. What a smart move you made to go there. And that you have all those people around you too, that grow food and that would be fine. Again,
hopefully
that's the model I think that you have to think about for the 2020s. And it's also a good stopping place, because it's really what I wanted to leave people with, was this idea, the game has changed. You have to think about everything from wealth building to your own resiliency and your own ability to paddle your own canoe, or for you and your family through what is almost certainly going to be at least some amount of disruption going forward. And, we hope the bad guys don't win, but there's some very bad ideas running our institutions right now. And I agree with you. The single biggest danger that I see too is that, psychopaths got to be psychopaths. Yeah. And if things really go bad for them, it's not obvious how elites running big institutions like the WEF and the WHO will react to that. And so you have to be prepared for, if 2020 didn't teach you, the importance of being disconnected from the kind of government choke points and institutions, that were rolled out in 2020 onward, then you weren't paying attention very well. And so you should be thinking that way. That's kind of my message to people.
Yeah.
You want to add anything to that, or I think we brought it home? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's it.
Nice.
But I guess the point I'll just add is that we lost sight of the importance of community and networking over the last 100 years or so. That's the norm for human civilization,
It's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. Like the fact that this is happening is, and my friend Rich here on the island with me, he said this too. What a time to be alive. Like what a fabulous challenge. What a great thing that's going on.
Great experience.
Yeah, like it's I think what people want most is give me an experience of being alive. And it's like, well, if you can't draw that from what's happening today, then again, like what are you doing? I mean, this is the greatest challenge probably. It's certainly for our lifetimes, the biggest thing that's ever happened is how are we going to get through the next 10 years? And I just think you covered so many bases, Joe. Thank you very much for all of that. And for sure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. We'll have to do it again soon.
Soon. I hope so. All right, my friend. Take care. That's enough out of me. Thanks everybody for tuning in to Expat Files. And we'll be back with more great content on future episodes. Thanks again, Joe. Take care.
Yeah, man. See you later.
All right, buddy. Yep.